On today's episode of the Locked On Texans podcast, Neosporin is needed for the Houston Texans after they've made some cuts. Who was the biggest surprise, and what roster cuts indicate certain moves or the future for the Houston Texans?
You are Locked On Texans, your daily podcast on the Houston Texans. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers, to this Wednesday episode of the Locked On Texans podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you to all of our first-time listeners and viewers. Please subscribe, like, and comment to the Locked On Texans podcast on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast. And also thank you to all of our everydayers, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, even Saturday. Thank you guys for coming back to continue to support Cody and myself as we continue to talk Texans. I'm your football analyst for the Houston Texans, John, some sports guy Hickman. On the other side of the screen, all the way up in Detroit, still Texans credential media member. We saw the comments, but now a part of Detroit News, Cody Davis. Man, is this going to be, I think, an exciting and insightful show. But today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. But it's also time to dive into the Houston Texans. Cody, take it away.
And that's what we're going to get into today, because on yesterday, as everyone knows, the Houston Texans had an opportunity to put together their 53-man roster for the 2024 campaign. So we're going to give our final thoughts on the roster and look at every single move and see whether or not we can indicate what the Houston Texans have in store and whether or not they are set at certain positions. And of course, John, listeners and viewers, as you guys know, it didn't matter if the Houston Texans are competing for a championship. It doesn't matter if they was competing for a playoffs. It doesn't matter if they were literally at the bottom of the league like it was about 2-3 years ago. You know, without a shadow of a doubt, this is not going to be the final version of the Houston Texans roster, because, John, I do believe some of these cuts, especially when you take a look at on the defensive side of the ball, Coach DeMeco Ryans and Nick Caserio will definitely explore the market around the league and see whether or not they're going to add some more new faces before the start of the regular season. But, of course, as always, every time we do our cut down day show, we got to start with some of the biggest surprises. And look, ladies and gentlemen, John, listeners and viewers, and however else I could spin that, I wasn't that surprised by the moves that the Houston Texans made on yesterday. I mean, honestly, the biggest surprise to me was the Houston Texans releasing Max Tuli, especially considering that, unfortunately, Christian Harris will start the season on IR, which means he's going to miss the first 4 games of the regular season. And look, the linebacker room, John, I know that's something that you have talked about time and time again here on this show, about the lack of depth at that position. And outside of Zeus, outside of Henry T, I do have some concerns at that position. But when I look at somebody like Max Tuli, you're looking at somebody who was arguably, if not arguably, the best undrafted rookie who had an opportunity to go out there on the field and showcase what he was able to do doing OTAs, rookie minicamp, mandatory minicamp, training camp, and through the 4 preseason games. You're looking at a guy in limited snaps, 10 tackles, 1 quarterback hit, 1 pass deflection, and of course, one of the best performances in my eyes came when the Houston Texans did have an opportunity to record a preseason victory over the New York Giants. So he went out there and recorded not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, but 5 tackles in the victory. John, I'm just looking at it from a standpoint, why in the world did the Houston Texans feel that they could afford to release Max Tuli, knowing that linebacking core is thin, extremely thin, due to the injury concern of Christian Harris? And to be honest with you, another surprise of mine was the fact that the Houston Texans kept Jeff Okudah. And I say that because, look,
not surprised.
It was a surprise to me, because I looked at it from a standpoint like this. I knew either CJ Henderson or Jeff Okudah wasn't going to make this 53-man roster. And I looked at Jeff Okudah the same way I looked at Noah Brown. How in the world can you make a 53-man roster when 9 times out of 10, majority of the time during preseason, during training camp, you stood on the sideline because you was hurt, unfortunately. And once again, I understand you cannot predict injuries. The injuries is always a detriment to a player and to a team, and I don't want to hamper too much on it. However, you look at the fact Noah Brown didn't make the 53-man roster because, his number one concern was availability, even though that young man played really well for the Houston Texans playoff run last year. Injury was still a concern. It was, and injury still hampered his ability and hampers his availability throughout this whole entire training camp, throughout this whole entire preseason. That's part of the reason why he's not on the 53-man roster. I looked at Jeff, I looked at CJ, even though both of those guys were a disappointment, especially Jeff Okudah. I looked at it from a standpoint, he is unhealthy. I can't remember the last time we even saw his name being part of the guys that dressed up during training camp, during practices, during preseason. Yet he made it. That was a surprise to me.
Not really a surprise to me. And I do want to let you guys know that the Texans kept 10 DBs: Derek Stingley, Kamari Lassiter, Jimmy Ward, Eric Murray, Jalen Petrie, Kalen Buller, Chris Boyd, which I think a lot of people was like, what about, but that's a good special teamer. MJ Stewart, I was actually shocked that he made the team, but when you look at Brandon Hill going down and them not getting an opportunity to really see any other positive productivity from that safety unit, bringing back MJ Stewart for right now was probably a good idea. Miles Bryant, Jeff Okudah, 6 linebackers. Aziz, no problem. Delshon Phillips was a player that I'm really glad had an opportunity to make this team. Henry Toto, Jake Hansen, Jamal Hill, Neville Hewitt. But I think the biggest surprise for me in terms of just roster cuts and looking at, okay, wow, Houston did move on from him, was number one, Robert Wood still being on this roster. Honestly, I just didn't see that happening at the start of the offseason period. I thought at the end of last year we were going to see Robert Woods moved on from about this time. And also just looking at players that I think I'm happy Houston kept. D'Angelo Ross at cornerback. I thought he performed well at practice, had good moments at practice, had some good moments during the preseason games. Delshon Phillips, as we talk about Christian Harris being out to start the year, he will miss at least 4 games. That is a very thin linebacker unit. And so you look at Henry Toto having more expectations to start the year off. He will start alongside Azeez Al-Shire. Keeping Delshon Phillips and rookie Jamal Hill, I think, are 2 positives for the Houston Texans. Number one, it gives you the depth that you need in a thin group. So at least you have players that are around that you have some familiarity with, and they know the system in and out. Then it also gives you the bodies that you need for special teams as well. Houston did keep Neville Hewitt. So I like those 2 moves. And biggest shocker, one has nothing to do with the Houston Texans. So I'll end my conversation off with that. But Houston will be without Danico Autry for at least 6 games to start the year because he's suspended. Kurt Hines has also been put on short-term IR list, so he'll miss at least 4 games. I was shocked that the Houston Texans cut Marcus Hill, rookie out of Auburn. He had a strong camp. He had a strong some preseason moments, especially the last 2. Now he can come back and be added to the practice squad and get elevated if he clears waivers. And I think for a lot of players, that'll be the case. You look at guys like, you look at David Sharp. Well, the Houston Texans will plan to sign him to their practice squad. Solomon Byrd, they have plans to sign him back to the practice squad. Ali Gay, same thing, plans to add him if he clears waivers. But I think because that position is so thin right now, that's a guy that I honestly would like, oh, okay, Houston, maybe you should have kept that body to make sure that you don't got to worry about waivers. He's here. He's in town. And another shocker, this has nothing to do with the Houston Texans in a sense, but the Rams traded Ernest Jones to the Tennessee Titans. I was like, man, I wish Houston would have got an opportunity to get their hands on him. I mean, he's a damn good linebacker. And with the question marks, again, I said it yesterday, I'm going to say it today, with the question marks surrounding Christian Harris, now we know more. He's dealing with that injury. He's going to be out for at least 4 games, bringing in a player of his caliber. And I think he was traded for a 2025 6th-round pick.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing. No, I mean, Houston just traded a few months ago a 6th-round pick for Ben Skoranek. And Nick Caserio don't give a damn about that because he's gone. But at least with that player, it's a difference between bringing in Ben Skoranek as a wide receiver in an already crowded wide receiver room compared to in Ernest Jones in a room that needs the depth but also needs the talent for a team that has championship aspirations. So for Houston, let me just say this, guys. I think, and we're going to look at this more in terms of what did some of these moves indicate for the Houston Texans. This is not the final roster in my eyes. And I think what Houston is going to do, of course, they're going to let guys go through like Jawar Jordan. If he clears, he'll come back as a injury reserve. He'll come back on IR for Houston. But some of these guys are going to come back. They're going to stash them on their practice squad. And when and if Houston needs them, they'll be available. They've been around already. Case Keenum will be out for an entire year. Houston also let go of Tim Boyle, which leaves Davis Mills as the only quarterback outside of C.J. Stroud. Is that room for panic? Not really, but you also, because the NFL just changed the elevation rule from the practice squad for quarterbacks, you also want to make sure you got a guy you can call on if in need of that body. And as a quarterback, you want to make sure that you're prepared. But again, I think Houston right now is looking around the league, and I think that they're going to make sure that they scout players that fit what they want to do here in Houston before the trade deadline. This isn't the end. We're happy that a lot of guys made it. I'm extremely happy for Delshon Phillips and D'Angelo Ross. I just thought that those 2 guys played well and were rewarded with roster spots. So was Jamal Hill. But you got to wonder, will some of these guys make it towards the end of the year?
I'm extremely excited for, of course, John Mitchell and Xavier Hutchinson. You know, I never really thought it was much of a concern whether or not they was going to make the 53-man roster. But, John, before moving on, I do want to ask you this since we're talking about surprise. And it leads us back to our number 1 topic of training camp. Are you surprised that the Houston Texans, not only as right now carrying 5 running backs, but once again, in my eyes, I see it as 3 because Darrell Gumbawale, special teams, British Brooks, fullback. But are you surprised that Dameon Pierce is still on this roster as of now?
As of now, I'm not surprised. If Cam Akers didn't show up like he did, show up and show out, I would be surprised. But I have confidence that Cam did enough to be officially this team's RB2. So then I'm looking at, am I surprised that Dameon Pierce is still on this roster as an RB3? No, I'm not surprised. Again, I would be surprised if it wasn't, if Cam wasn't a part of this conversation. Like he showed up and show out. If that never happened, oh yeah, Houston would be in trouble in my eyes. But it happened, and he has looked healthy. There hasn't been any health issues. He's been grinding it out. He's been practicing well. He's been performing well. So he earned his right to be RB2. RB3 in a lot of conversations and senses don't matter.
Which brings it back to a point I've been talking about all entire week. What is the purpose of him now? Yeah. Is he trade bait? Is he not? Where at a special team? Because when I got another thing, like I said all week, your primary kicker returner is going to be Steven Sims. So once again, what is going to be DP's role for this upcoming season?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Again, I think that they make a move.
They got time.
They got time in a sense, but when you have a season like this with a window like this, like we're looking at San Fran, and I'm thinking to myself, I think San Fran's window is closed.
No, that window is shut, closed.
I look at Buffalo, and I think to myself, I think that window is closing. So you have time in a sense, but not a lot of times. But now we got to look at some of these roster decisions What do they indicate for the Houston Texans in their future? More on the Locked On Texans podcast. Stick around. You don't want to miss it. And guys, I want to make sure Cody and I let you know the importance of not only showing up to home games, but being on time. We have seen the NRG Stadium look pathetic. Now, last year, towards the end of the year, you guys got better, Texans fans. You even had people coming from out of town to watch the great CJ Stroud and this team make it to the playoffs, which is a good thing. But this year, please be on time. And if you haven't got your tickets yet, I want to let you guys know about Game Time. Well, they have this new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live event or Texans game even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. You're winning, they're winning. It's a win-win deal. And with Game Time, you are covered with the best and most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. And if you find a seat in the same section or row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. What time is it?
Game time. Who?
Welcome back in, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers. Now we have to look at what does some of these decisions mean for the Houston Texans. And before we do that, I want to let you guys know that when you look at the practice squad rules, teams are limited to signing no more than 6 veterans to their practice squad. And a look around the league, Titans released former 2021 first-round cornerback Caleb Farley. Bobby McCain has also been released. Those are 2 good DBs to look at for a team that we haven't seen Jeff Okudah in live action. Jeff Okudah has made some plays in training camp, but I still believe that cornerback room is thin, just like I think that the linebacker room is thin as well. And when looking at Jamal Hill, Cody listeners and viewers, I want you guys to think Dre Greenlaw. Dre Greenlaw was a 5th-round runner, a linebacker. Jamal Hill is a 6th-round linebacker who just moved to linebacker a couple of seasons ago at Oregon, mainly playing safety. Think about some of the great linebackers in this league today that DeMeco Ryans has got his hand on. Dre Greenlaw is one of them. Fred Warner is one of them. Oh, by the way, Azeez Al-Shire is over here. We saw the ascension in Christian Harris's game to close out last year. So I'm glad Houston kept him on because I truly believe he could be a gem in the making, a diamond in the rough for the Houston Texans. But, Cody, when I look at some of these roster cuts and what they indicate for the Houston Texans, again, I want to go to the Houston Texans cutting all the fullbacks on this roster. Andrew Beck is gone. Harrison is gone. The fullback that Houston just signed last week, he's gone. And for me, if we could take a deeper look into it, like British Brooks making this roster gives them a younger back that has that athletic edge over the Andrew Beck and the Harrison. Houston going this route, I think, indicates a couple of things. One, hey, man, we have Brevin Jordan and Cade Stover, 2 guys we trust to be able to allow us to open up the playbook and be creative. Let's get creative out there. And again, DeMeco has called Brevin Jordan a Swiss Army knife. Brevin Jordan has recognized his talent and called himself a Swiss Army knife. Again, I think the bootlegs, that option with Brevin Jordan, and remember how much Bobby has utilized motioning Brevin Jordan and Cade Stover to this. It allows Houston to do what? Maximize the playmakers on the field. So I think that's a good thing for Houston in terms of just being able to get guys out there that can really wear a defense down with the amount of playmakers that can do something with the ball in their hands. But Cody, hey man, aren't you happy for British Brooks?
Of course, man, because look, once again, look, as of right now, the Houston Texans have 5 running backs on their roster, but I look at it as 3 because British Brooks is definitely going to have an opportunity to get a lot of snaps at fullback. And we saw what he just did to who was it, like number 93, 92 on Saturday, where he made one of the best blocks of the day. And I do want to give a special shout out to my boy, Brevin Jordan. Because remember this time last year, John, look, this year we have talked a lot about whether or not Dameon Pierce was going to make the 53-man roster. But remember going into last year, a lot of people had gave up on Brevin Jordan. It was like, there's no one in the world he's going to make it. And if he does make it, he was going to be, quote unquote, one of those bubble guys. Now we're looking at a situation where not only has he made another 53-man roster for this organization, but he is definitely going to have a more expanded role for this organization. Shout out to Brevin Jordan, man, because you know I've always been high on Brevin Jordan ever since the Houston Texans drafted him. And all of the small intangibles like his blocking that you and I have been, used to talk about a lot back when he first came with this organization. All of the small intangibles that we wanted to see him improve on, he did it. And that is part of the reason why he's still part of the Houston Texans today. But speaking of having more of a broader role, John, look, I know I've already mentioned both of their names in the first segment, but I'm going to do it again. The fact that they kept John Mechie and Xavier Hutchinson and let Noah Brown walk out that door off at 6'10" and Kirby means that they definitely going to have a bigger and better role for the Houston Texans in 2024. And I know we have spent a lot of time throughout this whole entire offseason talking about who's going to be next in line when you take a look at beyond your big 3, beyond Stephon, beyond Tank, and beyond Nico. There was a lot of people. It got to be Noah Brown. Look what Noah Brown did when he was healthy. Look what Noah Brown did meant to this organization when they went on their playoff run. We all remember it. One of my favorite stats. In 2 games last year, he had like 325 yards. We know how important he was, but we also know how much of a non-factor John Mechie and Xavier Hutchinson was doing last year. Both of those guys not only had an opportunity to improve their play, but they knew how important this training camp and how important this preseason, especially John Mechie going into them last damn preseason games, how important it was for them. Both of those guys answered the call, and I truly do believe that, look, I understand that injury played a role in Noah Brown not being here, but I truly do believe that Bobby Sloyd, Gerard Johnson, and even CJ Stroud to a certain extent, because I do believe he does have some say-so who he wants to throw the ball to. But I believe Bobby Sloyd looked at the situation and said, you know what? Not only are both of these guys young, but I've seen enough to say, you know what? My play calling could get even more dangerous if we have an opportunity to keep Xavier Hutchinson and John Mechie. And I know I've came on this show several times before and called Tank Dell by far the most dangerous X factor in the league, and I still believe that. But when you look at the Houston Texans as a whole, and you take a look at some other guys who could be dangerous X factors for this organization, it's going to be Hutchinson and Mechie, because both of those guys are going to have an opportunity to make some big plays for this organization throughout the entire 2024 campaign. And when you look at some of the players that were cut, I already mentioned Max Tuli, but John, you already said that this organization has about 9 to 10 DBs, right?
Right.
Out of those 9 to 10 DBs, I only counted about 3 or 4 cornerbacks, which lets me know that they're definitely going to be exploring the market over the next couple of days. They're probably already exploring the market as we record this as of 6 o'clock on August 27th, as of right now.
Even when I look at the cornerback position, specifically the cornerback position, I also want to take what you just said and look at the defensive tackle position because, going back to moving on from Marcus Hill, Kurt Hinish is now on IR, like we said. Audrey out for 6 games. Tim Settle has been having injury issues, and has he performed as well as you would like for him to perform? I think the answer to that, even at practice, has been no. That leaves Houston with 3 active defensive tackles: Mario Edwards, Folu Fadakausi, and Khalil Davis. And I'm happy for Khalil Davis. He's going to get more on his plate. But I think the indication is Houston has full trust in those guys to hold up for 4 games, or they are monitoring the market for players that have been cut or potential trade targets. Just because this is a team that rotates their interior guys a lot under DeMeco Ryans. I don't know how much 3 defensive tackles is going to hold up. Jerry Hughes should not slide in. Derek Barnett, maybe you 4-eye him, shade him over a guard. I'm not sure, depending on maybe third downs, you want to get after the quarterback, and maybe you look at it that way. Maybe he can fill in some of that Denico Autry role, sliding in, sliding out. But I do think Houston makes an addition to that group. And I think that would probably be the smart thing. Are we not sad about Lonnie Johnson?
I think he comes back on practice. Well, maybe he might, because Lonnie Johnson,
Mike Ford, Brandon K. Scott. Y'all pray for Brandon K. Scott.
Yeah, you know who I'm sad about the most? My boy Ben Scarani, man. At the start of training camp and during those first, 2 preseason games, Ben Scarani was making a name for himself, but unfortunately, he dropped the ball over these last couple of weeks, man, and now we're looking at him being waived. I do believe the Houston Texans might have an opportunity to bring him back on the practice squad. I don't really see too many teams that's going to be calling up his phone to try to get him within their organization, especially considering that majority, if not the main reason why the Houston Texans traded for him was because the Rams was about to release him, for themselves at the start of training camp. So, I wouldn't be surprised if guys like Ben Scarani, Max Tuli, who I would not also be surprised if Max Tuli gets his opportunity somewhere else, but JJ Taylor, Bird, even Troy Harrison as well, who played a somewhat of a good but bad game on Saturday because he had an opportunity to catch a touchdown pass. You're looking at somebody who was starting to build an important role with this organization about 2 years ago on the offensive side of the ball. Last year, he missed the whole entire season due to an injury. Go back to Saturday's game, did some good things. However, I think he got called for holding like 3 or 4 times, and one of the few things that irritate the heck out of Coach DeMeco Ryans is a holding call. So I think that's part of the reason why he's not part of the 53-man roster now. But, you look at somebody like him, I think he's definitely going to have an opportunity to come back for the practice squad as well.
Welcome back in, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers. Hey, make sure that you listen to our show Monday through Friday, but also for your second listen, enjoy the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. Get daily insight to the best fantasy draft strategy so you can win your league this season. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Before we close out, Cody, I got to say this, man. Final thoughts on the Texans 53-man roster. Boy, do I think CJ and this offense is going to have to win games for Houston. And I'm confident that they'll be able to do that, because right now, with my concerns with the D-tackle position, with the concerns at cornerback, with the concerns at linebacker, you just hope that key players don't go down. Like, how much do you believe Jamal Hill is ready for a regular season football game? How much can Khalil Davis come in and give the relief to Mario Edwards, to Foley, enough to where they're getting a break, it can come back, or one of those 2 top guys go down, right? And if it's just Kamari and Steen and no other cornerback can give them relief, I think that's bad for business as well. So my final thoughts on this Texans 53-man roster is it ain't final.
My final thought of the 53-man roster as of right now is just top heavy. And that's literally my concern. I mean, I take a look at every single position, and it's like outside of quarterback, because I think, God forbid, knock on wood, if something happened to CJ, the improvements that we have seen out of Davis Mills, I do believe he'd be able to keep this franchise afloat. But outside of quarterback and the receiver room as well, almost every other position, I'm looking like, man, if 1 or 2 players go down, I don't know if they're going to have the depth like they had last year to, stay afloat. I mean, of course, we talked a lot about the cornerback position. We talked a lot about, what we haven't talked a lot about on this show was the offensive offensive line. You know, your starting five is good, but outside of your starting five, you know, do you still have that same confidence that we saw out of Kendrick Green when after they traded for him? I believe last year, when he played like 3 or 4 games where he looked really good and it looked like he was on a trajectory to kind of reshape his career. Then he goes down with an injury. Now it's like, okay, can he still replicate that same success? Jared Patterson is still a part of this team. Jared Patterson was part of that offensive line in the preseason win against the Pittsburgh Steelers, where we came on this show. It was like, look, Patterson is one of them guys we do not want to see make the 53-man roster. If something happens at this offensive line and you got to call on his number at center, it's like, okay, what the hell are the
he did bounce back. He did bounce back.
He bounced back, but I still don't have that much faith in him. And you also got to take a look at it. Look, when you say he bounced back, he looked good on Saturday, right? What was the talent level with the players that they was playing against on Saturday?
The Giants had their starters out there for an entire half.
But who did they play on Saturday?
The Giants.
No, they played the Rams on Saturday.
Oh, the Rams. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, the Rams. Yeah, you're right.
And the Rams did not. And look, and I get it. It's the last preseason game. And, of course, that last preseason game meant a lot to those players. And I'm not shooting a shot at them. However, I just look at it from the standpoint when Patterson was playing against, you know, somewhat decent talent, he did not look good. You're playing against guys that, unfortunately, had to turn in their playbook. Of course, he looked better. So that's just, you know, that's literally my number one concern, you know. This team is top heavy, and we have seen this franchise before in the past where they have had talent on both sides of the ball and all this other stuff, but they was top heavy. Now you look at it from a standpoint, one, you got a better GM, you got a GM that's working with the head coach and working with the coordinator. So I will feel more confident once they start adding more names at every single position. But as of right now, it's like, damn, everybody has to stay healthy.
Well, with the offensive line, I think that's always the case.
Mm-hmm.
And luckily for Houston,
no, I think last year with the players that went down, they had some guys that stepped up and held their own, i.e. George Fant. That's why he's starting today.
Yeah, George Fant. Shout out to George Fant. But I think that's why Houston drafted Blake Fisher. And Blake Fisher got a lot of work in the preseason. Yeah, he did. A ton of work.
Training camp, for sure.
Training camp, going up against Will, going up against Daniil, going up against Barnett. Fisher got a lot of work, and that's good. Patterson, second year in the league, been with this team, starting back from last year. But I think for the offensive line, Cody, you make a good point. Like last year was a little bit better, but one of the things that we believe can help this team make it to the championship is if this offensive line stays healthy for the most part. And that needs to happen regardless of, you know, who they have backing them up. They got to stay healthy. They got to be the driving force to help this offense reach its level that we believe we can. And I'm just really curious to see. And I think D'Amico kind of tipped his hat a little bit and gave us an insight. Nick knows what we want to bring in here, who we want to bring in here. I trust him because I know he's going to do what we need to keep it going. So, like, I think it's going to happen. And my final thoughts is, as we are extremely happy for a lot of these guys, man, like, we watch football, and when you watch football, you kind of lean towards a player that really pops off the screen. And I don't think a player popped off the screen to me as much. And I'm not talking about any other veterans. I'm not talking about any of the starters. But I don't think a player popped off the screen to me more than Jamal Hill and Dale Shun, and they both made it. So, like, you're happy for some of these guys, but I would not be surprised if, hey, listen, thank you for what you're doing, but we gotta bring in another player. And we may let you go, bring you back to practice squad, keep you around, if elevate you if we need to. But they got to get better in some positions, and I really anticipate that is going to happen within the first 4 weeks of the NFL season. So thank you guys for watching today's episode of the Locked On Texans podcast. Please be sure to subscribe, like, and comment to the podcast on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. Follow me on Twitter at John_Hickman12. I do think currently how this roster is put together, Cody, I agree, top heavy, but it is still a very good roster to have for the Houston Texans.
Oh, yeah, it's still a really good roster. But as always, I'm your host, Cody M. Davis. Please remember to follow me on Twitter at CodyDavis_24. Once again, it's Cody COTYDAVIS_24. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.